I'm pregnant with Keith's child, so please divorce him. My younger cousin Alex, who was 15 years younger and had always been fond of me, suddenly told me. I tried to discuss the situation calmly, but my words did not reach her, and she tried to kick me and my 3 sons out of the house. We were supposed to have gotten along well until now. However, to protect my sons in our home, I confronted her with a truth she did not know. My name is Angela. I'm a housewife who lives with my husband Keith, who is 3 years younger than me, and our 3 sons, making us a family of 5. I met Keith at a company where I worked before we got married. Keith worked for a company owned by his father, and when we met, he was part of the sales department. Since the company I worked for was a client of his company, Keith, who visited weekly for sales, I became acquainted and started dating. At that time, Keith was divorced and he had 3 sons from his previous marriage, whom he was raising. Right after we started dating, Keith introduced me to his sons, saying, "I am dating with the intention of marrying her." Initially, the sons were shy around new people, but gradually they grew fond of me, and I found them endearing, so Keith and I decided to get married soon after. Around the same time as our marriage, Keith was promoted, and he encouraged me to quit my job and become a full-time housewife. Since the sons were still young, I followed Keith's advice and became a full-time housewife. This year marks our 10th wedding anniversary. Now, Keith is an executive at the company, and our sons have grown up considerably. The boys, not going through a rebellious phase, often help around the house and seem to be doing well in their studies and extracurricular activities at school. My days spent with my family were very fulfilling. One day, Keith and I went to a family memorial service. Since the relative's house was located in a place with poor access to public transportation, we rarely met unless there was a service, and I enjoyed catching up with relatives I hadn't seen in a long time. Among them, I had a particularly lively conversation with my cousin Alex, who was 15 years younger. The last time I had seen Alex was before I got married, when she was still in junior high school. Having grown into an attractive young woman, she appeared charming and very appealing to me. As I praised her for becoming prettier, Alex affectionately intertwined her arms with mine. Being an only child, I thought this might be what having a sister would feel like, and I was very happy about reuniting with Alex. Alex had graduated from college and found a job near the city where Keith's company is located, and she seemed to have lively conversations with Keith as well. Keith did not know the company where Alex worked, but she knew about Keith's company and praised him, saying it was impressive that he was an executive at such a big company. That day, we exchanged contact information and promised to meet again since we lived nearby. Then we went home. Upon returning home, I had already received a message from Alex, and we arranged for her to visit our house the next weekend. It didn't take long for us to become close with Alex, and she began visiting our house every weekend. Although the sons were sometimes absent due to club activities or lessons, Alex was considerate and often brought up topics that seemed to interest them. Keith also said it felt like he had gained a sister, and when Alex came over, he would enthusiastically prepare a barbecue in the garden or sometimes plan a long drive. After about 6 months of such days, she suddenly stopped coming over. At first, she said she had suddenly become busy with work and started declining our invitations, but gradually she began to ignore my messages, and eventually she stopped coming to our house altogether. Considering her age, I thought maybe she had a boyfriend, but since we had been close before, I was disappointed. Apparently, Keith also hadn't received any messages from Alex, and the frequent barbecues and outings had also stopped. It might have been about 2 months since we last saw Alex. I was walking near Keith's company on a weekday due to some errands when I spotted Keith from behind on the opposite sidewalk. It appeared Keith was not alone. There was a petite figure next to him. Their proximity seemed too close for mere business acquaintances, and occasionally Keith would make gestures that seemed to bring him closer to the person next to him. Concerned, I decided to discreetly follow them. However, my worries turned out to be groundless, as moving to the same sidewalk, I realized that the person next to Keith was Alex. Since I knew Alex's workplace was also nearby, they might have met by chance. Keith and Alex seemed to be having a friendly conversation, and I was relieved to realize she hadn't stopped visiting us because she found us annoying. She had been getting along well with Keith, and I could understand why they might be physically close. It had been a while since I had seen Alex's face, so I was happy to see her and tried to call out to them. However, the expression on Alex's face as she looked up at Keith was one I had never seen before. Perhaps it was a woman's intuition, but it seemed like she was looking at Keith as a man. Keith, too, was not behaving as he did in front of me and our sons. His smile was unusually affectionate. Despite my suspicions, I couldn't bring myself to call out to them and kept a safe distance as I followed them. They walked through the office district and headed towards an area with many bars. They went further into a more secluded area and entered a hotel. Unable to confront them, I ran home in shock. Thinking about it, the conversation with Alex had become lively only after Keith joined in. I had thought she was fond of me, but it seemed Alex had approached me to target Keith, visiting our house every weekend. Now that she had Keith, she no longer needed me, with whom she had been so close. That night, Keith came home from work later than usual. The sons were already asleep, so I confronted Keith about what I had seen during the day and asked if he was having an affair with Alex. Keith did not make any excuses and readily admitted to the affair with Alex. It turned out she was pregnant, and Keith planned to marry her and divorce me. Keith and Alex hadn't known each other for very long. I pressed Keith about when they had started their relationship and how they had deceived me and our sons. However, Keith's affections were clearly with Alex and their unborn child. When I pressed him, he became angry and left the house in his suit. He must have gone to Alex's place. Thinking it impossible to discuss anything in his angered state, I decided to take a cooling-off period. I told the sons that Keith was on a business trip and tried to continue living as usual to calm myself down. But about 2 days later, during the time the sons were at school, Alex came over. She stood at the entrance without any sign of remorse. "I'm pregnant, so please, Angela, divorce Keith." Even if it ends up that way, I think we need to discuss this. We need to consider your unborn child and my sons. When I responded like this, Alex sighed dramatically. "You can just take your kids, Angela. Oh, and this house? Could you give it to us? I think a single-family home would be better for the baby. Why don't you just rent an apartment somewhere and move out?" I thought Alex, who I believed admired me, had changed her attitude and started treating me and my sons like nuisances. However, it seems she still doesn't know something about my husband. Shocked by Alex's attitude, I did not comply with her demands. "The children will be taken in by my husband. Perhaps you don't know?" "What are you talking about?" "These children aren't mine. They're my husband's from a previous relationship." Alex seemed surprised by my words. It's likely that my husband never told her that he was divorced and that I am his second wife. Also, since my sons and I get along well, she never suspected that we weren't biologically related. Yet, despite her surprise, Alex stubbornly insisted that the sons should be taken in by me. The conversation remained at an impasse as the time for the sons to return was approaching. Since it wasn't a conversation suitable for the children, I asked Alex to leave. She reiterated her belief that my husband and I should divorce and that the sons should be under my care. Then she left. I was bracing myself for what Alex might do next when my husband contacted me. He proposed that the three of us discuss this coming weekend. I informed them of a time when the sons would be away at club activities or lessons, and arranged for them to come over. However, when the day arrived, the two showed no intention of discussing. Instead, they maintained that I should take the sons and leave this house. "We're not planning to give in at all." Despite his infidelity being the cause, my husband was demanding a divorce with a domineering attitude. I thought we had been getting along as a family, but it seems that he has erased the past 10 years of memories and is only looking towards a new life with Alex. I didn't want to part ways like this, but I realized that it was impossible to repair our relationship with a husband who only thinks of himself. So, I agreed to the divorce. However, I couldn't agree without setting my own conditions. I told my husband that in exchange for agreeing to the divorce, I would demand compensation and child support. He seemed to only hear the part about agreeing to the divorce and quickly nodded in agreement. My husband often promises good things, but has repeatedly failed to keep them. The primary victims of his broken promises have been my sons since they were young. He would promise to take them out to play, But then he would get bored and leave the house under the pretense of work many times. Considering my husband's current attitude, I suspected it would be the same as before, but I silently accepted the divorce papers he brought. His section was already filled out, and when I finished signing in front of both of them, they celebrated exaggeratedly. My husband hugged Alex, and she rested her head on his chest, leaning into him. It was clear I was betrayed by the two people I trusted, so I looked down to avoid watching them. After their moment of joy, they asked when I would leave the house. I did not respond and instead brought out an envelope I had hidden under the table before the discussion began. Unaware that the envelope would affect their future, they looked annoyed as they tore it open and checked the contents.
Hey, what is this?
After reading a bit, my husband shouted out loud. The envelope contained a report from a detective agency, and it detailed numerous acts of infidelity by Alex.
This is a lie.
As he screamed, my husband threw the report on the table. Alex picked up the thrown report and checked the contents herself, but she quickly changed her expression and fell silent next to the shouting husband. That was right after I noticed my husband and Alex's affair. I had never been close to Alex before, but when she suddenly started to cozy up to me at a memorial service, I became suspicious and decided to investigate. I thought maybe she was eyeing my husband's position and planned to steal him from me, seizing the opportunity at the memorial service. Using a detective agency, I soon understood her scheme. For several years, Alex had been deeply involved with a nightclub worker and had been contributing a significant amount of money to him. Unable to cover this with her salary alone, she had borrowed from multiple financial institutions and was in a cycle of taking new loans to repay old ones. Perhaps Alex saw an opportunity in my husband's wealth and executed her plan during the memorial service. Cornered with evidence of her infidelity, she was unable to make excuses. Her scheme had backfired. The detective's report included not just documents, but also photos of Alex entering a hotel with a nightclub worker, making it impossible for her to deny the accusations. My husband continued to harshly blame her, and eventually she exploded in anger. "Shut up! Without money, you're just an attractive old man." Though they had just celebrated our divorce, they began arguing intensely in front of me. Just when I thought this would draw someone else's attention, indeed a shout came from behind.
Enough.
The voice belonged to my father-in-law, Jason, who had been waiting in the living room's back room.
What are you two doing? Stop troubling Angela any further.
My husband did not expect his father to be there and began to look uneasy. Moreover, his father was angrier than I had ever seen him. Since this was the first time Alex had met him, she did not know who he was at first and was shocked to be scolded, exclaiming, "Who is this person?" My husband stopped her from confronting his father and apologized.
Sorry, Dad.
He had never apologized to me, but he still couldn't stand up to his father. Actually, when my husband had contacted me wanting to talk, I had anticipated trouble and consulted Jason. He had always been supportive of me, especially since I had remarried with 3 stepchildren and had a good relationship with him. Jason was still actively involved in work and did not spoil my husband just because he was his son. Before our marriage, my husband had admired his father and was dedicated to his work, which was one of the things that had attracted me to him. When I consulted Jason, he also shared that he was facing some troubles and told me things about my husband that I hadn't known. Jason revealed that recently my husband had been slacking off, not returning home all day after leaving for field work, and his unexplained absences were increasing. Even when directly confronted by his father, my husband only offered plausible excuses, and his reputation at work seemed to be gradually worsening. I asked Jason when my husband's work attitude began to change. It started about 4 months ago, and I suspected that might have been when he began his affair with Alex. Before we were together, my husband often visited the company where I worked. I had thought it was for work, but occasionally it was just to see me, suggesting he tends to become passionately involved when he is in love. When I told Jason about my husband and Alex, he said their affair might be the cause, knowing my husband well. That's why I had Jason wait in our home's guest room on the day they came to talk, to hear the truth. During the discussion, my husband and Alex's arguments were consistently selfish, and they even started arguing with each other. Listening from the guest room, Jason's anger must have reached its peak. After criticizing my husband's work attitude, he announced that he would fire him. My husband frantically apologized to his father, who was unyielding. Regarding the house, which my husband and Alex insisted on keeping, Jason said he would not allow them to live here since he had bought it originally.
It's outrageous for you to think about driving out Angela and the grandchildren to live here yourselves.
At this point, Alex finally understood who Jason was to my husband and started frantically apologizing alongside him. Eventually, they tried to make Jason relent through tears, but he was already well aware of what kind of person Alex was and didn't fall for it. Perhaps realizing there was no convincing Jason, my husband shockingly turned to me for help.
We're aiming for an amicable divorce, right?
Despite everything being overheard by Jason, my husband desperately clung to me. I felt my feelings for my husband, who still only thought of himself, cooling rapidly. Since I've signed the divorce papers, we are now strangers. Please leave with your new partner and sort out your issues together. With my sons about to return home, my husband and Alex were practically expelled from our house by me and Jason. That night, I explained to my sons that we would be getting a divorce. I thought they would be shocked, but it seems they had already sensed it and readily accepted the divorce. My sons, whom I thought were still children, had grown up more than I realized. They had been let down by my husband's broken promises since childhood and had learned to avoid him as they grew into teenagers. So, they were actually relieved about the divorce. When I asked them whom they wanted to live with after the divorce, all three said,
Of course, with you, Mom.
While I had said what I did to Alex and husband to give them a cooling off period, I had no intention of letting my sons go. We strengthened our family bond, determined to make a fresh start as a family of 4. Later, I submitted the divorce papers, and my husband and I were officially divorced. Thanks to Jason's generosity, we continued to live in the house. He was very concerned about everything and apologized repeatedly, though it was all my husband's fault. While I was divorced from my husband, I wanted him to remain a grandfather to my sons. We were beginning to build a new family dynamic. As for my husband and Alex, they seemed to have a lot of trouble after they left, and eventually split up when it was revealed that the child she was expecting was not my husband's. Shortly after their breakup, my husband called me, saying,
We've broken up, so let's get back together.
Of course, I refused, blocked his number, and informed Jason. Jason then promised to keep my husband away from me and the boys, and apparently cut ties with his son. My husband could no longer return to his family home, and while I don't know where he is living now, he is apparently working somewhere as the child support is being deposited monthly. A mutual acquaintance once told me they saw my husband, but he was so emaciated that he was unrecognizable, bearing no resemblance to the flourishing man he once was at Jason's company. As for Alex, after splitting with my husband, she informed the real father of her child, the nightclub worker, and tried to marry him. However, he did not reciprocate, and she was ultimately abandoned. She complained about this to a colleague at work, turning it into office gossip, making her workplace unbearable, and she resigned and returned to her parents' home. Her affair with my husband became known to her family, and my aunt and uncle, her parents, promptly came to apologize to me. Her parents decided to take care of her child after birth, and Alex was to move far away, where she would never see me again. They arranged a live-in job for her, where her salary would go towards paying me compensation. Considering Alex's history with a nightclub worker, I wonder how long she can endure such an environment. As things settled down, I started job hunting. Wanting to cherish my time with my sons, I was selective until my former company, learning I was job hunting, reached out to me. A vacancy had just opened in the department I had previously worked in, and they said it would be helpful if I could return. So I started working at my old company again. As I began working, my sons suggested we rotate household chores, and we started helping each other out more. Thankfully, with support from Jason, we were enjoying our new life, closer and happier than ever.